Welcome to the very first episode of the Classy Neurotic Podcast. And here's my guest, Rinwald. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name. Actually,
Rignald.
Rinwald? Okay.
Yep.
It's going to be a really interesting conversation. I hope we can really talk about Jan 6. I know that's like your favorite topic right now. But
Yep.
before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your channel's all about?
I'm Rignald. I do debates and I do a lot of research. I mainly talk about January 6th because I think it's a very important topic. I really like the way that U.S. democracy functions, and so I like to view my debates as like sort of a litmus test for Republicans to see if we can be on the same ground and if they can be honest in admitting that they actually do care for democracy and that Donald Trump tried to subvert it, or that they don't care for democracy and they don't care about American values. So that's mostly what I try to aim for with a lot of my debates, and I talk about like certain pop culture things. I'll read through certain piece of legislation. I read indictments. I just like, I feel like on the left there's a lot of people, or there's like a void with people actually going into like firsthand accounts and like certain legal documents and getting a really good comprehensive understanding of all of it. So that's what I'm trying to fill in.
You've read the indictments and you've read the Colorado case
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. Do you want to give us a brief overview of what happened on January 6th and stuff like that, and then we can get more into details if I think of something.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I'm currently writing a big Substack post, going through all of the firsthand accounts, making a lot of references to the specific documents and the specific indictments. So if you need like a ton of different details, I'm going to be releasing something with all of my notes on January 6th. But basically what happened is, prior to January 6th, Donald Trump has had active interest in undermining the integrity of any election he's a part of, just in case he loses. We've seen him do this in 2016. By claiming that the Republican primary was rigged against him and in favor of Ted Cruz, by claiming that illegal immigrants were voting in the 2016 election and that he had actually won the popular vote as well over Hillary Clinton. So Donald Trump has a history of undermining the integrity of the elections that he's a part of. In 2020, it was the same thing. It's just that he happened to lose that election. So when he lost that election, he was spreading false claims of election fraud in order to get the result of the elections overturned. Whenever just spreading the claims didn't work, he filed a bunch of lawsuits that were more or less frivolous in order to uphold this idea called the false electors plan, where they would submit fraudulent slates of electors to the joint session on January 6th in hopes that Mike Pence would choose their fraudulently slated electors over the state's certified electors, which is basically asking the vice president to determine the outcome of the election despite the will of the people in those states. He also tried to use the DOJ to lie to state legislatures to try and get them to decertify their election results. And when none of that worked and Mike Pence refused to go through with that plan, he reinserted a bunch of drafted insults towards Mike Pence into his speech on January 6th. He told people to march onto the Capitol to disrupt the certification process, and he exploited the violence that ensued from the Capitol protest to try and further that plan more. And then when that didn't work, the DOJ appointed a special counsel to go after and investigate Donald Trump, and that resulted in not two grand juries determining that there was probable cause to indict him, and a bunch of wackiness from there.
Okay, and where do you get most of your information about the January 6th case? I guess you read the indictments, but have you gone through the Jan 6 committee, because they have the whole YouTube channel and everything? It's a lot of content, by the way.
Yeah. So when it comes to where I get my information, the first thing that I read about it was the initial Jack Smith indictment. From there, I was looking at the specific dates that were provided in the indictment to find firsthand accounts from Donald Trump's advisors. I kind of leaned on the January 6th Select Committee kind of as like a crutch if there was ever any missing details, and I tried to get my information elsewhere, because there are actually some genuine concerns about some stuff with the January 6th committee, and even if there weren't, it feels like it's been completely, I don't know what the correct word is, all of the legitimacy that it had has been kind of robbed of it from Republicans. So I try and go to other sources outside of the J6 committee, and because it's just so long and there's a lot of filler material in there. So yeah, so whenever I'm like reading about it, I tend to go straight to Jack Smith. I don't read the January 6th report. I read the transcriptions of the depositions with certain people. I'll try and find like direct documentation, like there's prints of the fraudulent certificates that the electors sent, so I'll reference those. But but I can't really name like one particular place that I get all of my information from, because it's necessarily improving like conspiracies, especially when it comes to like a conspiracy as big as to like disrupt the certification of the election. You can't get all of your information from one source.
Sure. So that's like the one thing I find really cool about like researching on Jan 6 is that all the information is out there, and like there isn't. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, and of course, like Jack Smith can only say like so much because like a lot of it's like confidential, and like there's other people that could possibly be indicted, the co-conspirators. But like none of this is a conspiracy theory. Like all this is like out there for like you to read and everything though. And we have like articles and articles about it if you don't have time to read like the 165-page report or the final report that just came out this week. Do you want to talk about like the final report?
I just want, but before,
Sure.
I'm more than glad, but I do want to touch on one thing that you said, in that whenever people talk about conspiracy theories, I think they put the wrong emphasis on what the problem with conspiracy theories are. The problem with conspiracy theories isn't the conspiracy part, because conspiracies can genuinely be engaged in. There can be conspiracies to do something. The problem is the theory aspect, is that a lot of people are very keen to assert conspiracies, but then only do it based off of theories, and then there's no facts to actually back that conspiracy. What happened on January 6th is absolutely a conspiracy to disrupt the election results, but it's not a theory. We have documentations of every single thing that was taken to further this conspiracy. And I've noticed a lot of people like hear conspiracy and then their brain flies out the window because they don't actually know what it means, and they just think of Alex Jones. But like the problem with what Alex Jones did is that he was like theorizing on all of it. There was no documentation to back up any of it. So I just wanted to add that little caveat. When it comes to the final report from Jack Smith, realistically, everything that's in that document feels pretty established already. I think if you're looking for like the most cohesive report on the facts of the matter, I actually prefer the motion that he submitted in response to the immunity ruling from the Supreme Court to Tanya Chutkin to just cover exactly the facts that he has on Donald Trump, and if not, it's covered by the immunity. I much prefer that documentation because it's much more fact-driven and it's much more dense with documentation. But when it comes to the final report, I still think there's a lot of like helpful information in it. It's a more abridged version of like the allegations. I think it's only like 30 pages of what the actions Donald Trump took, but the rest goes into like the relevant laws that he broke, the troubles that the prosecutors were having with like search warrants, a lot of the procedure of the DOJ that a lot of Republicans are kind of confused on right now. So I think it's a really useful report. It's just we didn't get too much new from it.
But there are like some interesting things in it, because like one of the things that was brought up that I feel it's probably going to be weaponized by Republicans is the fact that like he's not going to like charge him with incitement.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I'm like wording it wrong though. But basically, it's like using
charges.
incitement.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So like, do you want to touch on that?
Whether or not Donald Trump actually engaged in incitement is one of the biggest gray areas, I think, in January 6th, because as much as Republicans like to misuse it, he did say peacefully and patriotically make your voice heard, so that does hurt the ability for a prosecutor to get an incitement charge. But there is a quote that he gave. Just give me 1 second to find like the direct verbiage of it, but basically saying that the First Amendment has never covered anything like Donald Trump has done. Like like even if you say to peacefully and patriotically make your voice heard, if you leave no other option for the rioters, like telling them that their country is going to be stolen from them, you know exactly what's going to happen, especially since Donald Trump has been on record, and this is referenced in the final report, acknowledging that the crowd on January 6th was rowdy and was angry. He was saying that to White House aides. So for him to be saying all of this inflammatory rhetoric and expecting saying peacefully one time to nullify all of that is dishonest. But whether or not a prosecutor could actually get charges on that, I truly don't know, and I think it is kind of a hard case to argue. Here's what Jack Smith said. This was the quote I was referencing, though. It is well established that the First Amendment does not protect speech that is used as an instrument of crime. So even if he said peacefully and patriotically, it's very hard to argue that Donald Trump wasn't using that speech to send people to the Capitol to try and further the conspiracy to get the results overturned. Whether or not he expected it to be violent is almost irrelevant, because he knew exactly what the outcomes he was trying to get out of that crowd was, which was pressuring the vice president to violate the Electoral Count Act on January 6th.
Okay, and like well, let's talk a little bit about the Electoral Count Act, because I know like recently right now people are talking about pretty awkward, but Vice Kamala Harris certified the results of like this election without any issue and everything. And very interesting that I found that I didn't know about very recently, but we actually passed a law under the Biden administration, essentially just kind of like reinforcing like what's the role of like the vice president during like the certification of votes. And it's like a mediator role. Like they can't like literally just like say like, oh, hold up, we're just gonna like stop this thing and just like really like change like whatever it's going on. So, but it's being like weaponized right now to say that like, oh well, the Electoral Crown Act or specifically the role of like the vice president is like ambiguous or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2022, we passed basically an amendment to the Electoral Count Act, and basically what that did was it clarified the president's or the vice president's ministerial role in the vote counting, but it also changed the way that Congress objects to a certification. It's no longer one representative, one senator. I know it takes a lot more to actually object to a slate of electors now because of the way that Donald Trump was trying to game that process. But for people to say that, for anyone who doesn't know, the Electoral Count Act is basically just a piece of legislation that lays out the exact process by which we certify the electors on January 6th during the joint session of Congress. And what John Eastman and Donald Trump, by extension, was arguing is that the vice president actually has the authority to act unilaterally instead of passing it off to Congress and certifying these electoral college votes. But I think it's funny, and I have heard this talking point that a lot of Republicans say, like, oh, well, if it wasn't up in the air about what the vice president's roles were, why would you pass the amendment, basically? And the answer is, not even John Eastman thought that the vice president had that authority. We have testimony from a bunch of White House aides and Mike Pence's legal counsel saying that Eastman's proposal would get shot down in the Supreme Court unanimously. So even John Eastman didn't think that the Electoral Count Act provided the vice president with this power. And we know that because even in John Eastman's initial memo outlining the plot that they were trying to get Mike Pence to go through with, it says that it would diverge from the procedures in the Electoral Count Act. So for any Republican that's saying like, oh, well, the Electoral Count Act maybe did provide for that the first time without the amendment, just doesn't know the facts of the matter, because they're defending Donald Trump on something that he doesn't even defend himself on.
Well, you never know. I mean, maybe Eastman is a genius, and this could have been a cutting edge interpretation of the law. You know, like Brown v. Board of Education.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, like, the fact of the matter is, like, Eastman was trying to say that the Electoral Count Act is unconstitutional and that Pence had the authority to act unilaterally under Article 2 of the Constitution. So he was basically saying, hey, listen, the Electoral Count Act does this, but we should completely disregard it because it's unconstitutional. Even though the Supreme Court had previously upheld the Electoral Count Act, and even though Article 2 of the Constitution doesn't provide that the vice president has that power either, he was basically just telling Mike Pence to break this law because they think the law is bullshit, which you're not allowed to do.
Right. So getting to like the specific claims made by like Trump and his team, I noticed there's like two camps of Trump supporters. You have the people who are like die hard, the election was stolen. You know, the election was stolen, whatever, by the Illuminati or they're saying. And then you have the other camp that says like, look, whatever, Biden won the election, but there were some concerns of like voter fraud, and it's possible that we should like look into these things, and that there are legitimate concerns about the integrity of the electoral process. So maybe it's like reasonable that like Trump would try to like use whatever like legal maneuvers to see if there's a way to sort of kind of like investigate this.
So there's a lot of problems with that as well. I mean, I find it a little more respectable than just coming up with grand conspiracy theories about how the election was stolen. But I mean, the simplest answer is there's a time to investigate election fraud, and it's between when you cast your ballot and when the ballots are certified. After January 6th, that's the date. Like, if we push the date back 2 months for you to look for voter fraud, you're going to ask to push it back another 2 months because you think that's unfair. But we set a hard date, January 6th, that all of the contesting of the election should be about resolved by, and that's it. So for them to ask for more time is just not provided for within the law. But this hits at something that a lot of the Trump supporters in the Trump campaign was saying about the plot, in that while we were only trying to get these electors sent because there was ongoing litigation in these states, but we have evidence that the litigation that they were filing was also bullshit. Like, that was done in bad faith. We have multiple correspondence between Eastman and other Trump campaign officials basically saying, like, yeah, just file litigation, and that should be enough to get these electors done regardless of the merit. We have Sidney Powell filing lawsuits against Dominion, and Donald Trump signal boosting these lawsuits, even though he behind the scenes called them crazy. We have the craziest one is that there was a lawsuit in Pennsylvania that came back with a negative ruling against the Trump campaign the day before the electors were supposed to cast their ballots, and the Trump campaign lawyers hid that from their potential electors because they were afraid that if they knew that the litigation in Pennsylvania was thrown out, that they wouldn't sign the ballots. So for people to act like these were like genuine contests to the election results, just don't know what they were doing. Like, the Trump campaign obviously had bad intentions when filing these lawsuits, and it was just done on the grounds that they can basically throw out election results because there's ongoing litigation. If they actually wanted to contest the election, they would be able to bring suits that wouldn't get automatically thrown out on standing because they were trying to have someone from Pennsylvania sue someone from Georgia, or they would have they would listen to the DOJ when they're making their investigations, or the state investigators when they were releasing the results of their election investigation. Like, if they actually had the will, like the intention of meaningfully contesting the election, that's fine. The problem is that they lied about it.
Weren't there like over 200 of these cases that were either dismissed or they just lost?
It was 62 lawsuits, I believe. One came back.
I don't know where I got the 200 from.
Yeah, it's sorry. Okay. One came back with a ruling in Trump's favor, but found 300 miscast ballots in Pennsylvania, and then the rest were either dismissed on standing because they didn't have enough relevant evidence to bring the suit, or because they were having someone with no jurisdiction to file a suit, filing the suit. So basically, someone in Georgia can't sue Pennsylvania because of how they run their elections, because it's up to the individual state as to how they run their elections. So someone from Pennsylvania has no say in how Georgia runs their elections. And that was the story of most of those 61 lawsuits, is that they were just trying to throw litigation up so they could have a justification for the electors. It didn't matter the merits of the lawsuits, because they didn't need to come back with favorable rulings in order for Donald Trump to win the election, according to these people.
But didn't you see really weird situations of the dead people voting, people from 1900 casting their votes for the election? Don't you think that stuff's weird?
It's a little strange, but I mean the amount that happened was massively overblown. I think Georgia, state investigators got back to the Trump campaign. Giuliani alleged that there were 200 dead voters, and the state investigators found 4. And also the Trump campaign couldn't even keep their numbers straight, because one night they would say that there was 2,000, the next night they would say there was 400, and then the next night they would say there was 4,000. So there's a conversation about hey, it's kind of weird that all of these dead people were casting ballots, but the numbers that we're talking about is 4 to 10, not 200 to 1,000.
Okay. And what about the whole like conversation with the whole like mail-in ballots that like they had to like they changed these laws or whatever with the mail-in ballots and like that's how they got like more Democratic votes.
Yeah, this is the problem, is that there are really interesting conversations that we can have about election integrity, but Republicans have lost all ability to honestly have those conversations because they've basically given away all credibility that they had to genuinely contest the election. If you want to have a conversation about like, hey, isn't it weird that we changed these laws out of nowhere in order to change the way that mail-in ballots are distributed or whatever they're alleging, that's a completely fine argument to have, but they weren't actually interested in having that argument. They were interested in using the questions about how people have the questions that people have about how this process works in order to exploit them to sow distrust in our elections. I think the fact of the matter is that if the mail-in ballots were super, sketchy and that they were, delivering dishonest results, I'd imagine that the state investigators would be able to find any shred of evidence of that, but they just haven't found anything.
I just think that's like it's like really funny though that like a lot of these things like usually have a very like rational explanation to it. Have you read the document Lost Not Stolen?
I've skimmed some of their findings, but I've never read the document like paid like front to back.
Yeah, well, I recommend people do read it because I think that document really does like lay out a lot of like the claims like regarding like not just the dead people voting, but also like the non-citizen votings and like that sort of thing. And I think it's a really good document, and I think it has like good legitimacy. It was written by I believe like a handful of like conservative or Republican lawmakers, and like lawyers, and like it's really good. It kind of debunks like a lot of the like misinformation about this. So what
and
from the indict?
I'd say,
no,
sorry, just real quick. I'd say
No
that's also a problem that a lot of Republicans run into, is that they always like to allege this giant conspiracy top to bottom that the presidency and all of the state investigators and all of the state legislatures are biased against Trump and are just trying to keep him out of office. But they don't realize that most of the state investigators, most of the people that he was reaching out for in order to decertify their electors, were MAGA Republicans. Rusty Bowers was someone that supported Donald Trump in the 2020 election, and they were trying to bully him into violating his oath of office, and that's when Rusty turned on him. Or someone like Jeffrey Rosen, who came out about the DOJ plot, was literally appointed by Donald Trump the same month. So for people to act like there's not huge incentives for Republicans to come out and back up their guy, and instead they decided to come out and completely undercut their party, to act like they have motivation to do that aside from just good conscience and trying to maintain democracy is insane, I think.
Yeah, the Rusty Bowers like one was like actually like pretty depressing to hear about because this guy like actually campaign with him and voted for him, like really like advocating for him. But then like apparently like once he couldn't do Trump's bidding, Trump started like saying all this nasty stuff about him on Twitter at the time, and apparently like there was actually like a mob of people of like Trump supporters like right outside of his house, Rusty Bowers' house, while he was like taking care of his like dying daughter with cancer.
Yeah, and they were like filming him and calling him a pedophile. Like it was like absolutely unhinged. And it's sad because we have like a lot of documented things, sadly, of Donald Trump like offhandedly tweeting out that somebody's a fraud or that somebody is like destroying the country, and then he just puts his phone down and then goes back to work. But he doesn't realize that all of these legislators are now having to deal with Trump supporters coming in the hundreds, calling them a pedophile, or call it like there was one that was brought up in the new Jack Smith report that somebody that was investigating him for the federal case ended up being called the N-word and saying that whenever Donald Trump wins the presidency, they're going to be taken out back and shot. Like, I don't think Donald Trump realizes what his rhetoric does. And we just ignore it for some reason. Like, I don't know how he could have been let off the hook for what happened to Rusty Bowers. Or the fact that during the point of this, he placed a call to one of the state legislators to decertify their electors, and when he refused, Donald Trump literally tweeted out his phone number and had a bunch of Trump supporters calling his phone number in order to threaten him if he didn't decertify the electors. Like, Donald Trump actually acts like a mob boss, but no one pays attention to it.
Yeah, I think it's just insane. Like we never like really like hear about this like from politician. Like yeah, people like do like really like corrupt things all the time, but this is just like at a really insane level, which I just wanted to get into the next point. What do you think was like the most interesting event or just like fact like you heard from like this indictment?
So this is from the first indictment because in the superseding indictment, the Supreme Court ruled that Jack Smith has no authority to push on these crimes. But I think the craziest thing was I was watching some streamer talk about it, and he brought up this point, and I thought it was so insane that I didn't even believe him until I went and looked at the documentation and thought, like, holy shit. Like, him trying to pressure the Department of Justice to send the letters to the state legislators to recall their electors, and then trying to fire Jeffrey Rosen for not sending that letter and replace him with Jeffrey Clark, who is like a civil litigation lawyer within the DOJ that he wasn't even supposed to have correspondence with. That was like... That was so unbelievable the first time I heard it. I didn't even believe that it happened until I read the court documents from Jack Smith and the testimony from Jeffrey Rosen, Richard Donahue, and Eric Hirschman. And it's unbelievable to me that even Republicans that do know about this defend that kind of behavior, and they accuse Democrats of weaponizing the DOJ. Like, when they accuse like Joe Biden of weaponizing the DOJ, they're talking about like the FBI making a request to Twitter with no legal bindings, but then they completely ignore that Donald Trump was trying to fire his attorney general if he didn't lie to the states for him. That was completely unhinged.
What's like a common like argument you hear that like about this like whole like indictment thing that like it's like kind of like meant to like sort of like whitewash like what happened?
Yeah, it sucks because a lot of the main talking point I've heard about most people's involvement with the 2020 election is they'll always say like, oh, well, doesn't Trump have the ability to question the election? And they'll always bring up the faithless electors thing in 2016 and try and like draw comparisons, but it's obvious that whoever brings that up just doesn't know the facts on the ground. To compare the John Eastman false electors plot to individual electors in the 2016 election deciding to be faithless with no direction from Hillary Clinton just tells you that they don't know any of the facts of the matter on either case. But Republicans don't care about substance. They care about talking points. They care about how fast they can rip off a rebuttal, and they don't care about the actual substance behind it. So they'll just offhandedly say like, oh, well, Donald Trump has the First Amendment right to question his elections, and that's absolutely true. But the problem is that he went far beyond just using his First Amendment right to question the election. He went to illegal means to try and overturn the results of that election.
I mean, there's like the very fact that he just like lied about like pretty much almost everything when like the document pretty much outlines that I got multiple times, during the whole process, he and his team were told that, like, whatever claim you're making about Georgia or Arizona or New Mexico, or whatever, is wrong. And then, like, the next day he just goes back to, like, saying, like, whatever thing that was, like, disproven. It's just, like, extremely, like, disheartening to read about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why the letter thing with the DOJ was so crazy, is because in that letter it was alleging that Georgia basically had a bunch of impropriety in the way that their elections were run, and that their election results are severely called into question. And the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General told Donald Trump multiple times, hey, the DOJ hasn't found any of this. There's nothing to substantiate any of the claims in this letter. And Donald Trump wanted to send it so bad that he threatened to fire the Attorney General that he just appointed a month ago. There were so many times that he would go to different White House staff and then ask them about different election fraud claims, and then whenever they didn't back him up 100% on them, he would just fire them, because he wasn't actually looking for like meaningful talking points, and he wasn't looking for like actual questions about the election. He was looking for butt boys who would basically, say whatever he wanted them to say and do whatever he wanted them to do, because I believe he's an authoritarian. I don't think he likes autonomy within the three-letter agencies, and this whole thing outlined that like 100%. He, like, if you don't 100% agree with the baseless claims that Donald Trump is giving to you, you're fired. I think the dude was Bill Sapien, and they call it Team Normal in the J6 committee. He like went through a big firing thing with all of the White House campaign staff and replaced them with people like Rudy Giuliani, who like is a notorious hack, or like John Eastman, who's now disbarred for going to illegal actions and violating attorney-client privilege. There's people like Janet Ellis who literally pled guilty to the Georgia indictment.
I think like recently we just like found out a verdict with the whole like Giuliani case. Unfortunately, he's still gonna keep his house in New York and his condo in Georgia,
Yeah.
but whatever, in Florida, whatever, it's
Mhm.
fine. It's Rudy Giuliani's right to lie. It's protected by the First Amendment. Um, but that's like a whole like separate case. Have you read like any of the cases regarding Rudy Giuliani? Because I honestly haven't like read any of it besides just like summaries of like news articles and whatever.
Yeah, I read the only document that I've read directly corresponding to Giuliani was that First Amendment right to lie document that he submitted to the judge to try and fight back against his civil litigation from Ruby Freeman. But that's the only thing that I've read. I haven't gone in like super far into the details of it, other than he lost that case because it's not his First Amendment right to defame poll workers. But that, yeah, like I haven't read into it obviously as much as I did like the Jack Smith case or the case in Georgia.
Okay, that's fine. So one of like the things I keep hearing about, like in the headlines, that Jack Smith said that like if gone to trial and everything, that Trump would have been convicted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
I 100% believe that is true. A lot of people don't really understand that like when we say guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, that doesn't mean we need Donald Trump on tape saying, "Hey, I intended to spread false information in order to illegally overturn the results of the election." That's not the level of evidence that we would need to prove this. But we have so many pieces of evidence of Donald Trump and his campaign acting in bad faith in order to uphold plots that were trying to subvert the law in order to get the results of the election overturned. We have John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani who basically say multiple times, "Hey, I don't know the specific details, but we're all Republicans, so we need to get this done anyway." And we have the call to Raffensperger saying basically like, "Hey, just find me 11,000 votes." It's the level of evidence that we have of everything. We have countless pieces of evidence of Donald Trump saying all of these things, of repeating claims that were previously disproven to him by DOJ staff, of him disregarding certain opinions because they didn't agree with him, of John Eastman literally saying that the merits of the cases that they're filing don't matter because they're just using them as a pretense to submit the fraudulent electors. We have Mark Short, who I don't know his political affiliations, but is a true patriot because he was standing up against John Eastman and Donald Trump and telling him, "Hey, all the shit that you're doing right now with the false electors is wildly unconstitutional and undemocratic." We have like mountains of evidence, and one of the most damning parts is that Donald Trump tried to reinsert attack lines against Mike Pence after Mike Pence refused to go through with the plot, and then after he was at the White House, after his speech at the Capitol, while people were in the Capitol searching to hang Mike Pence, he saw some person on the news talking about how frustrated they are with Mike Pence, and instead of telling the rioters to go home, he tweeted out that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what was needed to save our Constitution. Like you could absolutely get him on a conspiracy to overturn the election. You probably could. I think Jack Smith probably could have gotten him on more. It's just the Trump campaign is famously bad at covering up their steps. Because we have the same amount of evidence for all of the impeachment trials in 2016 and all of the stuff with Roger Stone and in the 2016 Russia investigation. Like the Donald Trump campaign is just really bad at covering up their footprints. So I honestly do believe that Jack Smith could have gotten him on all of these charges.
Okay. Well, why couldn't this go to trial? What happened?
So basically, the Supreme Court made up this ruling that the president has selective immunity for certain things that he does within the office. So that stagnated the trial a lot. Jack Smith had to do a superseding indictment, which is basically restarting the indictment process and getting a new grand jury to determine that there's probable cause. Basically restarting the litigation of the of the case. And also, beforehand, we had the Attorney General Merrick Garland really sitting on their hands in pressing charges for this case. And then the reason that it didn't ultimately go to trial is because the DOJ has a policy that they will not prosecute a sitting president of the United States, and the people have determined that we don't really care that much about democracy, that we're perfectly willing to, throw out American democracy as long as it means lower grocery prices, which can't even happen. And they reelected Donald Trump, and now the DOJ cannot prosecute him because of a longstanding policy within the DOJ.
Yeah. I think it's just like really interesting that like at least like people within government know that like everything's like really messed up. I mean, there's a famous quote from Mitch McConnell, like even though he didn't vote to impeach Trump, he did say like just because he doesn't vote for it that like he doesn't think that it absolves him of like any crimes. It's pretty obvious what's going on here, but like why does the general like American public just like allow this to happen? Like this, look at what happened in South Korea this past week. When their president tried to like put like martial law in the country, he got impeached almost immediately, and like just like today, I think like or this week he got like arrested.
I think there's two problems. I think the first problem is that in order to realize the scope of everything that Donald Trump did, you need to learn like a basic amount of civics. You need to generally understand how the government works, and you need to understand how litigation works, and you need to understand the powers that Donald Trump wields before you can understand how he abused them. And the American population just doesn't really give a fuck about how the government runs. Not a lot of the American population knows any basic civics, and not a lot of people know that it is a wild abuse of power to try and get your vice president to do that, because I doubt that the majority of the American population knows that the vice president certifies the election results even. So whenever most people talk about January 6th, they just think about like a couple people breaking some windows in the Capitol, and they don't realize like the actual threat that it posed to the democratic will of the people. So it's that, and it's also that Donald Trump has been really good at sowing distrust in every single institution that isn't Donald Trump. You obviously in 2016 he was saying, okay, listen, you can't trust the Democrats because they're all poised against me because they don't want me in office. And then he says, and we also can't trust the establishment Republicans because they're the same as the Democrats. They just want to do the bidding of the establishment. They don't want an everyday person like me to be in office. And you can't trust the three-letter agencies because they're all working at the behest of the establishment. And you also can't trust the media because they're all working at the behest of the establishment. And you can't trust the legal processes because they're not even investigating our claims of fraud. And like by this point in our history, Donald Trump has successfully put it in the Republican Party's brain and a lot of independents' brain that there's nothing that can fact check Donald Trump because Donald Trump is the only person that we can trust anymore. Like, we can't trust the media, we can't trust the legal system, we can't trust other Republicans, we can't trust Democrats, we can't trust independents. Like, the only people that we can trust is the super tight knit circle that MAGA holds, and that's been successful, and it's preying on a lot of people's general, like, because the media isn't perfect, obviously. The establishment, Democrats and Republicans, aren't perfect, obviously, and a lot of people were really frustrated with that, and Donald Trump was just in the right place at the right time and was able to sow this amount of distrust in all of these institutions and say the actual answer is us.
Yeah. It's just like really like horrible, like what's going on here, and like I said before, like this wouldn't happen in like any other country, sort of thing. But he's gonna be president next week. The recording of this video, it's definitely gonna be a shit show.
Yeah.
I don't know what the world has in store for us, but like let's just like take a break about talking about Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
What's your opinion on Joe Biden?
I think he was senile. I think that he didn't have his wits about him. I think it was the stupidest thing in the world for him to announce that he was running for a second bid when the first time around he said that he would be a one-term president. But all things considered, his mental faculties considered, he got a lot of good pieces of legislation passed. I really like the Inflation Reduction Act. I really like the Infrastructure Act that Donald Trump was trying to get passed for years. His support for Ukraine was really nice. You can argue about the details of how he did it, but his withdrawal from Afghanistan was ultimately good because we've been there for so fucking long, and he's the only person that actually pulled the plug on it. And ultimately, he respects the Constitution. I think that he has a good American heart in him that I don't think the alternative does. So, I mean, when it comes to Joe Biden, is he my first pick? No. But, I mean, he got a lot of good pieces of legislation passed anyway. And I think if you asked most Democrats in 2020 if they thought that Joe Biden would be this successful in legislating, no one would say that he would be this successful.
It's kind of hard to like assess if he was like a good president. I mean, I think obviously like the worst thing was just like again running the second time, which like basically just had a really bad campaign for him, and of course like Harris, it affected Harris's campaign as well. Though it's hard to assess like the success of his policies though. But like from what we know right now, these could have like really like long term effects for us that we're just not going to feel it right now, but like definitely like putting us in a good direction. And I just don't think we're going to be able to like access that for a really long time, kind of like
Absolutely.
similar to Jimmy Carter, who passed away this year.
But I mean, even looking at his like leadership abilities, like specifically in the powers of the president, like he guided us out of COVID. Like the fact that everyone is more or less happy in 2024 when we just went through one of the biggest pandemics of modern history in 2021 is absolutely a mark on Joe Biden's ability as a leader.
What do you think was like the biggest failure from Kamala Harris's campaign? This just aside from just that it was just too short, or unless you want to just like talk about that, but yeah, it was just too short.
I think Kamala Harris's problem is the same problem that a lot of the Democrats face right now, is that she's just hyper uncharismatic, and she doesn't seem like an everyday person. I feel like a lot of people don't look at Kamala Harris and think like, oh yeah, I could be friends with her. They just see another Democratic talking head, basically. And I think that's the problem that the DNC faces with most of their potential candidates, is that they're just not charismatic. We still have the Hillary Clinton stink on us too, in that she was like hyper uncharismatic, and that's the only reason that Donald Trump won the first time around. When it comes to like what was the straw that broke the camel's back, like whether or not it was that we were dealing with unprecedented inflation and that most people don't really understand how the president interacts with that, so they just assume that Joe Biden did nothing about it. It could be that. It could just be that people have nostalgic glasses and don't really remember how bad Donald Trump was, and they just remember how good it was to be in 2018 compared to how bad it was to be in 2021. Whether or not it was that she had half of a campaign to work on and that Joe Biden basically shackled her at the foot for the first half of her campaign. It could be a lot of things, but I truly think that Kamala Harris was just at the wrong place in the wrong time, and I think Donald Trump was at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it just like really wasn't ideal conditions. You want to hear like an interesting theory I have?
Yeah, sure.
What if our attention spans are like so small that like we're never gonna be able to have a two-term president anymore? Like we're only gonna remember like what's happening right then and there. So like we're never gonna be able to like re-elect someone because like we can't remember stuff like that happened like I don't know like 4 or even like 8 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely subscribe to that, because I do think a big part of why people were so willing to vote for Donald Trump again is because they don't realize, or they don't remember just how bad it was 4 years ago. Like, even in 2016 to 2018, like every marginalized group was on their tippy toes trying not to get made fun of by like all of the culture war people. We had Caitlin Bennett going to different college campuses and harassing college students.
She's back the other way.
Yeah, I know, I saw that. I'm so thrilled about that. But yeah, it's like 2016 to 2018 was not a fun time to be alive, but a lot of people just look at it in comparison to like literally recovering from a pandemic, and they think, oh, well, you know, that was a better time in my life, so I'm going to vote for the president that was during that. Whether or not it's because people just have really short attention spans, or whether or not it's because so much like monumentally crazy shit has been happening in politics recently that when you look back on it 4 years later, you kind of question whether or not it was actually that crazy because you're still relatively fine. Like I can see why people would look back on January 6th and be like, hey, listen, like he stepped out of office, Joe Biden got in office, so it must not have been that big of a deal. But they don't remember how crazy it was to see all of these Trump supporters climbing in the Capitol window on January 6th. So I don't know. It could just be like the downplaying of history in people's mind because we've lived through so much history in the past 8 years, or yeah, just people's attention spans are so short that they don't even like think to even downplay it, and they just don't remember it.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to make like an apologetic for like January 6th riots or like anything like that though.
Mhm.
But I do think like there is a problem with the sort of normalization of political violence where it's just like sort of just we're just kind of used to it. So as you know, there was the assassination attempt, two assassination attempts of Donald Trump,
Mhm.
last year. Um, I condemn it. Of course, it was bad. I
Of course.
hate Trump. Like,
Yep.
don't kill him. No, but people kind of like forgot about that fairly quickly during the election,
Mm-hmm.
actually. And even though I do think like it definitely had a major impact on the election, though, I think there's a concern that that Americans just like are just kind of like how do you say, just kind of like immune to sort of like devastating news of any sort of like violence, whether it's like mass school shootings or whether it's like we're talking about like the recent actual assassination of the United healthcare CEO. And regardless like whatever like your politics are into this, I just think that there's a really huge problem right now that like we just don't really have a reaction, a healthy reaction to these things anymore. These happen, people talk about it for a week, and then we move on to like whatever the next things happen.
I think
Is whatever the next news event.
I think I half agree with that and half don't, because I think
Okay.
there is like too much normalization of political violence in the US, and I think a lot of people are numb to it. But I think another reason that people are numb to it is that in the US we are actually super insulated from political violence. Like we are a hyper privileged nation, and almost everybody has a really great quality of life. So no one really understands how bad political violence is because I'm in Pennsylvania and this is happening in Washington, but I'm not there, or like I'm in Idaho and Donald Trump almost gets assassinated in Ohio. I'm not there, that has no bearing on me. But imagine like I feel like it would almost be a bigger deal if we had a more direct view of this kind of violence, because we would know like, okay, I've lived through something like this. This is crazy, but a lot of people see like people crushing Capitol policemen with doors, and they just don't really think about like there's a certain disconnection that you have watching something unfold on a screen and but against like watching it happen in real life. So a lot of people see a Capitol policeman being like crushed by a door on screen, and they think it's like bad maybe, but they don't realize that that person's life was genuinely in danger when that was happening, because there was a giant crowd of Trump supporters trying to crush this person. Like I think it's partially that political violence has become normalized in the media, but also we don't really have a scope of political violence because we're also insulated as Americans because our country is so good.
I think that's a really like interesting point you have there. That like people don't really realize like how good we have it, and like in terms of like just like a little bit about the economy though. Like yes, prices are a lot higher than what they used to be, and yes, there are actual problems when it comes to like affordability of housing and as well just like healthcare costs and that sort of thing though.
Yeah,
But we
absolutely.
really did like a lot better than the other countries, and it's just hard to like really communicate with people. Now, of course, like going forward, I don't think we can just go if we're gonna like advocate for like Democrats in Congress. So I think we do have to have an empathetic approach of like of course addressing people's problems and not just like say like oh it's technically better because
Yeah, absolutely.
somewhere in
Hmm.
like Somalia or in Gaza, whatever, like some kid is like dying of polio or a He's
Yeah,
on track.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that also plays into just like, again, the charisma of certain Democratic candidates. Like, they don't have the ability to actually speak to the American voters because the American voters don't want to hear them speak. Whenever you look at Kamala Harris, you're not like, oh, I'm really excited to see how I can relate to her on a personal level. You just look at her as a politician. Whereas, like, I think Republicans genuinely do connect to Donald Trump on a personal level.
So, do you think they're gonna be able to replicate this in 2028? I don't know if he's gonna run. Like, here's the thing: people are saying that like he's gonna try to like run for a third term or so, whatever. Maybe might use some sort of illegal maneuver for this because it's historically like something he loves to do. But he's gonna be really old at that point. Like he would be like 82.
Yeah,
You really think he's gonna try to?
if we were living in a world 10 years ago where Donald Trump was currently facing his second term, and you asked me if I think he's going to run for a third term, I'd say probably, because I think he does want to be an authoritarian. I don't think he cares about the checks and balances of our government, but he's really old right now, so I don't even think he wants to be the president for another 4 years after this term. Whether or not he's going to put up like a suitable replacement and they're going to be like the dictator that we think Donald Trump is going to be, I would say no, but not on the grounds that the Republicans don't want that. It's more so on the grounds that I don't think the Republicans have anyone that's remotely as charismatic as Donald Trump right now. Like people turned on Vivek with the snap of a finger, and then people like J.D. Vance, I think, have like anti-charisma. Like there's a reason that like no Republican ever meaningfully turns on Donald Trump, but there was genuinely some frustration whenever he announced J.D. Vance, and they learned to live with it. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to like people who could feasibly replace Donald Trump after he succumbs to old age, I don't know if Republicans have it right now, but I don't know if Democrats do either. So that's the problem that we're facing.
But here's the thing: even if he doesn't like run in 2028 or try to run or something, though, he still has this like influence. Assuming he's still gonna be alive at that point, he still have this amazing, terrifying influence over Americans and over his own party. Like I can't really think of like that many moments in history where someone who's like he's like no longer like whatever like an incumbent politician, like basically making phone calls to get people like not to vote on the border bill.
Yeah, that's absolutely like terrifying. But I think I don't think that I think Donald Trump still will have like an unprecedented amount of power after he leaves the realm of actually running for president. But one, like, I don't know if his mental faculties will be as strong, so I don't even know if he'd have the ability to deploy that influence. And two, I think it will be diminished because I think ultimately Trump supporters don't like the only reason that Trump supporters are so ferocious right now is because they know that Donald Trump is going to be in office. I don't know if that ferociousness is going to transfer on to another candidate, even if Donald Trump tells it to.
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, what are like the other choices for 2020? J.D. Vance, Vivek, his son.
Yeah, I see all of those people, or like DeSantis. I see all of those people as like voids of charisma. I don't think that they actually have like any amount of connection to voters. Maybe Vivek, like I'd say that's probably their best shot, but I mean, like right now with how the bridge is burning between Vivek and Elon Musk and Donald Trump, I mean, I don't even know where he's going to be in 2028.
But still, like we don't know exactly like what's going to happen. Though, like for example, the economy is a really interesting thing because here's the thing: it's possible economically we're just going to be fine because Donald Trump doesn't have to do much. All he has to do is just like ride on sort of the reforms put out by Biden and just kind of like claim victory for it and a success for it though.
Yeah, I heard
because
there's some saying where it's basically like Republicans destroy everything and then Democrats come in and fix it, and then Republicans ride on the fixing that Democrats did and take credit for it and then fuck everything up again basically. So yeah, he's probably like, if we can learn anything from Donald Trump's first term, it's that he's a wholly ineffective leader and he can't get almost anything passed through Congress. So best case scenario is that Donald Trump just doesn't do anything, but the voting base still sucks him off for it because they don't realize that you can't change the economy in 5 seconds.
Yeah, because like the terrorists were like really bad. The terror proposals he had like during his campaign were like really horrible. Like I think even his own like supporters like admitted that like it would raise the prices, but like I don't know, it might
Yeah,
give us like some
absolutely. Yeah.
manufacturing jobs or something. Like but like because like they're so radical and because like he has like at least like some people in his team that like wouldn't support it. Um like I said, like the economy might just do okay. What I'm really worried about is domestic policy and foreign policy.
Hmm.
Uh, I think they spent like hundreds of millions of dollars on the whole like transgender thing, and I really do like worry like what's going to happen to like LGBT rights for like this term though because they've just become just completely unhinged though. Like when back in 2016, yeah, like Trump being somewhat almost moderate when it came to LGBT, plus issues saying like he wouldn't do anything regarding same sex marriage, saying that like Caitlyn Jenner can like use whatever bathroom she chooses.
Hmm.
But now it's just like you can't turn on the TV. It's either Biden bad transgender, Biden bad transgender.
Yeah.
It's
I
like all like we're hearing right
I
now.
agree that it's definitely scary, and like I can't like fully empathize because I'm not someone who is LGBT. But I imagine if someone like who was seeing Donald Trump saying that would be like absolutely terrifying. Um, but I think there's a little bit of wiggle room in that the first time around Donald Trump like he wasn't inflammatory to like gay people, but like with trans people he did pass the transgender military ban, so he did have some amount of like pull towards trans people, but it didn't seem like that was a legislative priority for him. And I think as long as he does like try and do some of the mass deportations he was proposing, that most of the trans rhetoric and trans messaging and like the demand for anti-trans legislation is probably going to go back down. Like because ultimately I do genuinely believe that like the transgender questions and issues are not real issues that actually anybody cares about, and they're just a nice scapegoat for the Republican Party. But I don't know if they'll need to use the scapegoat as much once they're already in power.
Okay. I just remembered the question I was going to ask you before about Gen 6. So, like I said, people are hurt by these prices and things like that. People like are like definitely the vulnerable population, working class population is being hurt by the effects of inflation. Why should people care about January 6th?
Um, it's the realistic answer is because if you think prices are bad now, wait until we live under like a dictatorship. Because whenever we throw out democracy and say that this doesn't matter, and when we as the people don't check behaviors that go against democracy, once we have a power that doesn't have to worry about subverting democracy and they can just stay in power, then they're not going to do what enriches the lives of the voters. They're not going to do what enriches the lives of the people because they don't need to worry about getting elected anymore. What they're going to do is enrich themselves. And we've seen that almost every country that lives under a dictatorship either goes through a bunch of coups and insurrections from the people because they're so poor and they need to overthrow this autocracy of all of the rich people living on top of them, or the country just collapses as a whole. So the main thing that I would say is that like you should care about January 6th because we should prevent America from turning into the same kind of dictatorship that everyone points at and says, "Oh, good thing we're not those guys," you know?
Okay. Um, is it okay if we wrap it around here, or do you have like anything like more
I'm
to
happy.
say?
I'm happy with this conversation. It was a good questions. And it was good being on here.
Okay, just like a couple like last questions though.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be a little quick. We recently just got the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. We've been like really just like we just seen these like terrible events unfolding before our very eyes for like well over a year now, and now it's almost come to a close. I'm still like not super optimistic about like what's gonna happen with the Palestinian people or like safety in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that?
I'm glad that it happened. I'm glad that we could get both parties to agree to a ceasefire. But I mean, I think a lot of people are going to view this as an end to the conflict, and they absolutely shouldn't. A ceasefire isn't the end to a war, nor is it even guaranteed. We've seen the success level of other ceasefires in the war between Israel and Gaza, in that they weren't effective at all, and that it still continued. So I'm optimistic for the future that we could finally get these two parties to agree, but I'm cautiously optimistic because just because there's a ceasefire doesn't mean it's going to be upheld, and just because there's a ceasefire, that doesn't mean that the plights of the Palestinian people are going to be over.
Okay. 2028 Democratic president nominee. Any people like you would like to see on the ticket?
I'd say I'd probably most favor Pete Buttigieg, but I mean, I don't really love any of the candidates. Like, I'm not super hard tied to him because anyone who's charismatic is probably a little too far left for the general voting population, and anyone who I think is about where they should be electorally or politically in order to get elected, I don't think has enough charisma. Even someone like Pete Buttigieg, I think that like his politics could get him elected, but he just needs to work on actually connecting to voters.
I would go for John Fetterman. That was a joke, by the way. Okay, well, thanks for coming on the show. If you guys want to follow Rignon, I'll have a link for his YouTube channel in the description, and of course, like once you have your Substack ready, I'll have that there. But yeah, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate
No
it.
problem. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.